Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back here to Hackensack, New Jersey, Bowler City, as we are bringing you the coverage of our first boys bowling match of the season for Fort Lee. And it is a great honor to see Bergen Catholic, my proud alma mater, taking on the Bridgemen here today. And once again, we are joined by the two coaches for our pre-match interview, as Larry Fierro, the head coach of Bergen Catholic, and Neil Best, the head coach of Fort Lee, are kind enough to join us. And guys, this is a great matchup involving a very powerful public school and a very powerful non-public school here in Bergen County. It wasn't originally on the schedule, but now you get a good chance to get a good matchup here involved, as both teams are also trying to finish off their seasons on a high note. And Coach Fierro, again, pleasure to see you. What is this like for your side coming off a sectional championship, something that Bergen Catholic hasn't done, like you told me beforehand, here since 2010? See if you're flipped on here.
For Coach Neal, he's always the top of the top in all the Bergen County coaches. Bergen County coaches are veritable who's who, Hall of Famers. And I'm just lucky enough where I get to hang out with them and take some notes and learn from them. Like I said, Coach Neal's one of the top. They have a great team. We'll see if we can give them a battle today.
And Coach Neal, you had a great matchup for your girls' side against Holy Angels. You got to see some of the top bowlers going head-to-head in that matchup. Now you've been going through the gauntlet the last part of this season. What does this matchup have for you and your team in store here to go toe-to-toe with a team that just took down the North 1 Sectional 4 sectional championship?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Bergen Catholic winning that high-scoring sectional championship over Bergen Tech. They ended up winning it in the 9th and 10th frame. I was here to watch it. Unfortunately, Fort Lee did not qualify on Friday in the Linden event for North 1B. This is our final match of the year. We've had a tough schedule this week. We lost to Hackensack, 15-3 team. We lost to Wallington, a 20-1 team. Well, hopefully we can beat Bergen Catholic to finish on a high note. Again, I think Coach Fierro and I, this is the first time in 9 years since I've been doing this as an assistant for 4, head coach of 5, that we're actually bowling each other. So this is a pleasure, and I get along with all his kids really well. And originally this was an offset shoot of one of his kids coming up to me and say, "Hey, let's bowl Fort Lee before our season ends." But I wish them nothing but good luck next week in the team tournament down at Bolero and the individual tournament for 2 of their captain bowlers, Liam Chin and Justin Martin, next week. So I'm looking forward to this match, and I hope our boys can end on a high note. Thank you.
And again, this is going to be a fun one to cover here today. Again, it's very rare when you see Fort Lee take on Bergen Catholic in any sport. So getting a chance to see this, and again, we'll see if the Bridgemen will finish off on a high note, if Bergen Catholic could see if that they could keep the ball rolling here today. As wish you all the very best, and thanks again, guys, for accommodating us and allowing us to cover this matchup today.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. Pleasure to see you again. Family friend, by the way.
Absolutely. Knowing Larry for a very long time, and Neil, again, doing a great job, as we're going to be bringing you all the action here today. Bergen Catholic taking on Fort Lee. BC 16-1 on the season. Fort Lee 15-3. So these are the two powerhouse teams in Bergen County deciding to take on one another here just at the end of the regular season. Bergen Catholic, again, will be participating in the 2023 state championships on Monday in North Brunswick, while Fort Lee is going to be trying to garner their 16th win of the season here today, as they are going to be trying to take down the Crusaders. And again, special thanks to Larry Fierro and Neil Grant for joining us, as Coach Grant joined us before the start of the girls' match against AHA. Holy Angels was victorious. That one, of course, was a very special afternoon as well, seeing 2 of the top 3 ranked bowlers in Bergen County go toe-to-toe. We're at lanes 49 and 50 here this afternoon. Keizo Katayama will be the leadoff bowler for Fort Lee. Stephen Lim will bowl second. Edward Coe will bowl third, and Alvin Gian will bowl fourth. So the first bowl of the afternoon, and it's going to be a strike there for Katayama. Fort Lee off and rolling. John Brignola will start it off for the Crusaders, as he'll get a 9 on his first offering. BC again won the North 1 Group 4 sectional championship recently with a total of 2,942 pins, topping second place Bergen Tech by only 27 pins here at Bowler City. And Fort Lee starting off quickly, back-to-back strikes, this time by Stephen Lim, the junior. So Katayama started off with a strike. Lim follows up with a strike of his own. And Bergen Catholic's Brignola will get the spare. The junior, who averages 176.2 per matchup. Two of Bergen Catholic's top bowlers are actually bowling in the JV side here today. Trying to make it 3 consecutive strikes for the Bridgeman, but that time Edward Coe, the senior who's ranked number 19 in the county in pin average, just left one shy up top. As Stephen Pohl, the sophomore for Bergen Catholic, threw a 6 in his first time down. Again, Bergen Catholics having Liam Chin and Justin Martin, who are ranked 7 and 8 in the county in pin average. They're actually on the adjoining lanes representing the Bergen Catholic JV today. And there's a spare executed by Edward Coe. So strike, strike, spare, the first 3 bowlers for Fort Lee. Great start for the Bridgemen. Paul looking for the spare for Bergen Catholic. And he'll miss it, and he'll leave 4 on the lane. So a spare and 6 put on the board for Bergen Catholic. Here's one of the top bowlers for the Bridgemen, and there's a strike right away for Alvin Gian, the senior, with a 190.5 average. So what an opening frame for Fort Lee here in game number 1. Strike, strike, spare, strike. As Bergen Catholic will have Nick Rossick try his luck, as Rossick will get 8 knocked down in his first approach. BC's only loss this season in a matchup was against Hackensack. They lost 5-2 back on January 9th. So already again, 40 pins for the team total for Fort Lee, and Bergen Catholic missing on that second ball. So officially they're going to say 9 on the scoreboard for Rossick. The sophomore getting a start here today again with 2 of Bergen Catholic's top bowlers not on the varsity. That'll bring up the 4th bowler, Andy Lee, the junior. Average of 176.2. And he will get the first strike for Bergen Catholic here this afternoon. So spare, 6, 9, and strike. The first 4 results in the first frame for Bergen Catholic. A 40-35 lead. As now we go back to the leadoff bowler, as John Brignola, the junior. An average of 176.2. Had a set of 598 for the Crusaders in their recent sectional championship. Keizo Katayama with his second frame of work. Had a strike in the opening frame. Now looking to finish it off with a spare here after getting a 7 on his first ball. Brignola, nice job there of knocking down the 10-pin. He gets the spare. And a nice spare there also executed for Fort Lee, as Katayama now starts off with a strike and a spare in his first 2 frames. Officially right now a 60-54 lead for Fort Lee. Stephen Paul, the sophomore for Bergen Catholic. BC in their red. He gets a strike to start off the second frame. So Paul bounces back after having a 6 in the first frame with a strike to start off frame number 2. And there's back-to-back strikes for Stephen Lim, the junior for Fort Lee. Averages 180.3, and Lim back-to-back strikes. He's got a double to start off his afternoon here in game 1. Fort Lee won a share of the Big North American Division title this year, sharing it with Dumont, as both teams went 7-1. It's going to be another 9 put on the board there for Nick Rossick. Rossick, 161.9 average so far this season. Fort Lee with their full complement of bowlers in their lineup, including Edward Coe. Coe is the leading bowler for this Fort Lee side with an average of 194 per game this season. Again, that's 19th best in the county as Rossick finishes off the spare. So Rossick with a 9 in the first frame, a spare in frame number 2. Edward Coe for Fort Lee and lane 50. Looking to convert a spare with the 10 pin. And he gets it. Spare strikes spare so far for Fort Lee in the second frame. That's after they had 3 strikes and a spare in frame number 1. Hot start for the Bridgemen. Bergen Catholic and Andy Lee leaving 2 pins left. Lane 50, Alvin Gian, the senior, with a 190.5 average for Fort Lee, having 1 pin left himself. Fort Lee trying to make it 3 spares and 1 strike in frame number 2. Bergen Catholic looking for 3 spares and 1 strike as well in this second frame. Lee looks for it and converts. So a strike and a spare starting off here today for Bergen Catholic's junior, Andy Lee. Gian, dead set, executes there, and he knocks it down for the spare. So both teams, 3 spares and a strike in the second frame. 119 to 94, the lead right now, heading into the start of the third frame, and there's Katayama with a strike for Fort Lee. Keizo Katayama now with 2 strikes and a spare. Fort Lee is on their game early on here in the first game of the afternoon. As Brignola gets a 9 off his spare. He's got 38 so far. He's trying to make it 3 consecutive spares to start off as the leadoff man for Bergen Catholic. That's going to be a roll of 9 now for Stephen Lim. So Lim's had an opportunity potentially for the turkey as he was going for 3 straight strikes to start off the afternoon, but settles for the 9. Now we'll try to finish it off with a spare. Brignola finishes the spare on lane 50. So 3 sets of spares to start off this afternoon for Bergen Catholic's junior. Leadoff bowler with 3 consecutive spares in the first 3 frames. 10 pins still left up here for Stephen Lim. And Lim, again, great accuracy so far for Fort Lee. They're not leaving any pins out there on the lanes. As Paul trying to build off his strike in the last frame, gets a 9 to start off. Fort Lee leading by 37 pins so far here as we're bowling again in the first game of this matchup between Fort Lee and Bergen Catholic. A rare matchup between these 2 schools in any sport. There's another strike, this time fired by Edward Coe. Coe at a 644 set and a high game of 245 yesterday in a matchup against Wallington. Go with the strike. Now Bergen Catholic just missing it on lane 50. Can't convert on the spare. So Paul will settle for 9. Fort Lee that time with a heavy ball, leading to that split. As Alvin Gian will try to find a way to spare it off. There's a strike for Bergen Catholic. And Nick Rossick. Rossig's first strike of the day. Fort Lee able to convert. What execution there by Gian. A difficult one to convert, but a spare nonetheless. And Fort Lee continues to put up the numbers. They lead by 53 pins so far here in the third frame. Bergen Catholic having their final bowler. 2 pins will be left up in the back right corner, as Andy Lee will try to spare this one off. Lee working on a 38. Coming up on this second ball of the third frame. Had a spare in the second frame, a strike in the first frame. And Lee will convert on that spare. So we are through 3 frames, and it's a 35-pin lead for Fort Lee. Heading to the start of the 4th. And there's a good beginning as John Brignola with a strike for Bergen Catholic to start the fourth. Katayama for Fort Lee looking to answer, and just will have the 10 pin kept up. He'll have the 9. They have it listed as a strike on the scoreboard, but I think they have to correct that as there's a 9 now put on the board. So the correction for Katayama as Paul starts his approach on the 49th lane, and he gets a 9. Katayama looking for the spare. In the black and yellow stylish ball, and Katayama converts. Keizo Katayama, 60 through 4 frames. Fort Lee is not missing on the opportunities here today. Is Paul trying to spare this one off? And just missed it to the left side for Stephen Paul, the sophomore, who averages 172.5. He's incredulous at how he missed that one. Thought he had it dead set. And speaking of dead set, the junior Stephen Lim, who had a high game of 230 earlier this year against Riverdale. Lim might be challenging that the way that he's bowling so far. He gets the strike. Rossig will leave 2 on the lane, so we'll have a chance at a spare. Edward Coe. Coe with the strike. Back-to-back strikes here for Fort Lee in the 4th frame. Spare, strike, strike. As again, Fort Lee has not had any empty frames so far here this afternoon. They have been dead on their game. Rossig just leaving that 1 pin left. He settles for the 9. Fort Lee continues to grow their lead here, and it's going to be another strike, this time from Alvin Gian. As Fort Lee, just as they did in the opening frame, 3 strikes and a spare. They continue to grow their lead here. Right now, it's currently a 68-pin margin. As Andy Lee is getting set, the 4th bowler for Bergen Catholic. Lee will roll an 8, have a chance at the spare. Fort Lee through 4 frames, 284. Bergen Catholic at 232 currently. Lee, who had a 589 set in the North 1 Group 4 sectional final. Looking to continue his hot start to the day. But the white ball will finish it off and spare it off in that back right corner. So it's going to be a lead of 50 for Fort Lee as we are through 4 frames here at Boulder City in Hackensack, New Jersey. Dan Long, so glad that he could join us alongside Dimitri Nanis on our broadcast coverage on Fort Lee's Athletics YouTube channel. Bergen Catholic taking on Fort Lee. BC 16-1 on the season. Fort Lee 15-3, trying to snap a 2-match losing streak, and they're off and running here. Keizo Katayama, another strike. Katayama up to 80. Katayama, who should be a familiar name to Fort Lee fans as we cover him with the baseball season. We'll be doing that again coming up this spring. Stephen Lim. And he walks away. Just got a little English there on that last pin to fall. And that is now dating back to the beginning of the 4th frame. 5 consecutive strikes for Fort Lee. Good conversion there by Brignola for Bergen Catholic in lane 50. But Fort Lee is trying to distance themselves from the Crusaders. They're up by 70. Again, 5 consecutive strikes as a team for Fort Lee. Edward Coe, the leading bowler for the Bridgemen. And there's the broadcast jinx. After 5 straight strikes, the 10 pin was left up in the back right corner. Paul for Bergen Catholic. will leave 2 pins in the back right corner for BC as Coe is getting set. Had some tough competition for Fort Lee this week, taking on Hackensack. 2 bowlers for Hackensack had 700 sets. And they took on Wallington yesterday. As that is a spare converted by Edward Coe. And Paul leaving another pin. Left that 10 pin up. Paul's been snake bit a couple times throughout the course of this contest. Paul is on a 52 through 5 frames. And 2 of Bergen Catholic's top-ranked bowlers are not participating here today. As there's a strike. Once again, this time by Alvin Gian. So Fort Lee, once again, another frame that sees the Bridgeman with 3 strikes and a spare. As Rossig fires that one in for a 7 on lane 50 for BC. Fort Lee's lead is now over 100. They have not left pins on the lanes. They have captivated us here today with their strike games. They've been on spot. As Rossig kicked that 10 pin out on the far side and left 1. So Rossig will settle for the 9. He's up to 66 in this first game. Larry Fierro having a couple of his younger Crusaders getting in the lineup here today as they finish up their regular season with this matchup against Fort Lee. This is the final day of the season for the Bridgemen. As Coach Neil Grant mentioned, they did not qualify in the sectionals. They finished 7th in North 2 Group 2 sectional tournament. Warren Hills and Morris Tech were the top finishers, so they then advanced to the state tournament. Bergen Catholic, they finished number 1 in North 1 Group 4, outlasting Bergen Tech here at Boulder City. They won their sectional championship for the first time since 2010, and in the process also qualified for the state championship that they'll be participating in on Monday. Almost converted on a crazy spare there, but Andy Lee will just keep 1 pin up. I was looking like that was going to be a magical conversion. And through 5 frames in game number 1, Fort Lee leads by 87. 87 pin margin here for the Bridgemen. Trying to take game number 1. Katayama, another strike. Enzo Katayama now 4 strikes in the first 6 frames. Rignola looking for the spare. He has 4 spares and 1 strike through the first 5 frames. Pin seeker right there as he converts again, another spare. Problem for BC has been the strike game here today for Fort Lee. As soon as I say that, another strike. Produced this time by Stephen Lim. The junior who averages 180.3. Again, I think he's going to be sailing right past that mark. Kim has 5 strikes in 6 frames. Paul on lane 49. Thought he had enough, but 1 pin left up. That being the 7 pin in the back left corner. You'll have a chance to spare it off. Another strike for the Bridgemen. Make that 4 in a row, dating back to the 5th frame. Fort Lee is not relenting at all here today. They're bowling their very best as Paul is able to convert there with a spare on the 7. Alvin Gian. And he gets the strike as well. And Fort Lee strikes out all 4 bowlers here with strikes in the 6th frame. As they are pulling away. Neil Grants with a little how do you do, looking back at me and seeing how good his team is bowling here today against Bergen Catholic. Crusaders bringing out the best in the Bridgman. All four bowlers with strikes there in the sixth frame. And dating back to the fifth frame, 7 strikes in the last 8 bowlers. Fort Lee is on fire here in game number 1. Just a strike for Nick Rossick of Bergen Catholic. Now that sets up Andy Lee, as Lee is the anchor bowler here today for Larry Fierro. As that will be a strike for Lee, so the Crusaders go spare, strike in the 6th frame. But again, they're playing catch-up here today. They trail by 138 here in game number 1 against Fort Lee, who are on their game. Can't stress that enough. Brignola starts off the frame for Bergen Catholic with a strike, so 3 consecutive strikes for the Crusaders. Katayama had that heavy approach in the head pin and just left the 7 standing up in the back left corner. Fort Lee is not missing opportunities for spares here today. Paul will go first with his first ball of the 7th frame. Try to make it 4 straight Crusader strikes. He'll just leave 1 pin left, though. Katayama for the spare. And that is the first time that Fort Lee has not been able to convert on a spare opportunity here today. They are human, as Katayama now with a 137 through 7 frames. Stephen Lim has been a strike machine. 5 strikes in the first 6 frames, as he leaves 3 there. Paul will look to convert on his spare opportunity on lane 50 for Bergen Catholic. They are in the red, Fort Lee in the gray polos. Paul will have that go into the gutter and leave just 1 pin left standing. Paul with an 80 through 7 frames. Comfortable lead for Fort Lee at 148. And there's going to be a spare converted by Stephen Lim. So Lim converts for Fort Lee as the Bridgemen continue to play at a top level here in the first game of this matchup against Bergen Catholic, as Nick Rossig, the sophomore who had a high set of 329 this season. Or no, he had a 329, excuse me, at the sectionals. Had a high set of 554 in a matchup against Cliffside Park back on January 17th, a league rival of Fort Lee. There's going to be another strike. Bowled by Edward Coe. Coe with the turkey. 3 consecutive strikes in the 4th, 5th, and 6th frames. Excuse me, correction, as Coe has a double, had a strike in the 6th and 7th frame. The man that currently is working on a turkey here is Alvin Gian. 3 straight strikes in this matchup. And that time, again, the broadcaster Jinx just missed the head pin. He was trying to look for his 4th consecutive strike. Andy Lee on lane 50 for BC. Lee leaves 1 left standing. Rolls the 9. Gian to convert on the spare. And does. Alvin Gian, the senior, with an average of 190.5. Rolling at a high clip here today. Fort Lee with a 576 team score through the first 7 frames. Lee looking to convert here for BC. Crusaders only with a team score of 411. He does get the spare. Lee has been the most effective bowler near the end of that lineup here today. A lead of 163 for Fort Lee heading into the 8th frame here of game number 1. Brignola, a little soft there in the pocket as that's going to leave the split. Katayama on lane 50 for Fort Lee, going back to his strike ways. Keizo Katayama, another strike. His 5th strike of game 1. Brignola taking a little time to get himself prepared here for this split. And it was a little bit of soft in the pocket. Led to this split. Let's see how he operates here. Well, knocked down the one on the left side. Was not able to kick it over to the far right side. So he'll settle for the 9. Stephen Lim leaving 2. Pair of Stevens, both in the 2 spot for the respective lineups. Here's Stephen Paul for Bergen Catholic in lane 49. He'll roll a 9. Paul is sophomore, 172.5 average per game. Lim converts on the spare for Fort Lee. For Lim, that is his 2nd spare conversion of this opening game. He also has been devastating with the strike ball. As Paul will get enough there for a conversion for a spare himself for BC. 5 strikes for Stephen Lim. Here's Edward Coe for Fort Lee on lane 50. 4 strikes in the game for Coe. Just didn't get what he was looking for there as he gets 7 on his first ball here in the 8th frame. I'll bring up Nick Rossick on lane 49 for BC. Rossick with the 6. And some young Crusaders getting varsity experience here this afternoon for Coach Larry Fierro's side. Liam Chin and Justin Martin representing their JV side here today. As that's a conversion there for a spare by Edward Coe. The rationale for the BC star, they want to be in position for all county honors, and with their averages right now in top 10, they didn't want to potentially sacrifice that opportunity before heading into the state finals. Alvin Gian with the strike once again. Five strikes for Gian for Fort Lee. A 6:51 team score through 8 frames for Fort Lee. As the Bridgemen well in control, leading Bergen Catholic by almost 200 pins here in game number 1. Here's Lee for BC. Working off a spare in the last frame. A roll an 8 there. And we'll try to convert here on the spare. Currently at a 118 in this opening game is Lee, a junior who averages 176.2. With the white ball, it works wonders as he converts on the spare. BC trails by 178 heading into this, the 9th frame of game number 1. Brignola starts off, gets a little extra help there on the left edge, and now gets a 9. Katayama's first ball of the 9th frame. Off the strike, gets a 7. Brignola has 4 spares here today. Now 5 as he converts there for the Crusaders in the 9th frame. Katayama looking for a spare of his own. Has 2 spares this afternoon for the Bridgemen. And he gets it. So both leadoff bowlers here begin with spares in the 9th frame. Paul gets the strike. Second strike for the BC sophomore. Stephen Lim. 5 strikes this afternoon. Joss left the 10-pin up. Had a spare in the last frame in the 8th. Working on a 183 so far. So Lim already above his per game average here in game number 1 against BC. Fort Lee leading by 179 pins. A big lead here in the first game. Trying to hand Bergen Catholic what would be potentially only their second loss as a team this season after BC lost 5-2 against Hackensack. Rossig just missing that head pin. He'll settle for the 9. Edward Coe. His high game this year was 248 that he rolled against Bergen Tech back on January 25th. Coe is the leading bowler statistically this season for Coach Neil Grant and the Bridgemen. And Coe makes mincemeat of the pins there with another strike. 5 strikes now in this opening game for Coe. Lee will get a 9 as he's trying to build off of his spare back in the 8th frame. Anchor bowler coming up now for Fort Lee on lane number 49. And there's a strike for Fort Lee as Alvin Gian continues his sensational start in this matchup. 6 strikes for Gian through the first 9 frames as Lee converts on the spare. Almost a 200-pin lead for Fort Lee here in game number 1. It's a 198 advantage as we head to the 10th and final frame in game number 1. Katayama starts off with a strike on lane 50. 6 strikes now for Keizo Katayama. The senior looks like he's going to get past his normal per game average. He averages around 185. Rignola with a roll of 8s there on his first ball of the 10th frame. Katayama with 1 strike in the 10th. Just had that one bounce away as it looked like it was going to ricochet and knock down the 7-pin. So Katayama will have a chance to spare it off and finish off a very impressive start to his afternoon. Rignola will get an extra ball as he converts on the spare on lane 49 for Bergen Catholic. The junior might approach his per game average as well. Averages 176.2. Katayama's final ball. And he converts on the spare. Rignola's final ball here for BC, and he gets the strike off the spare in the 10th. And he will finish with a 183. Fort Lee leading by 200 pins as we go to the second bowlers for both respective sides here in the 10th frame of game number 1. Stephen Paul for Bergen Catholic. Rolls an 8 there on his first shot. And a gutter ball for Fort Lee. A rare misstep there for Stephen Lim. Lim with hands on the hips. He was upset with himself. First gutter ball for Fort Lee. Lim is at a 192 right now as he'll get his second opportunity. Paul will try to spare it off to try to get the extra ball, and he'll miss. So Stephen Paul will end with a 128 for BC here in game number 1. Lim's second ball is good for a spare. So he makes amends after that gutter ball, and now we'll get a chance at an extra ball here in the 10th as Rossick throws for BC in 49. And the sophomore leaves 2 up. So Lim for Fort Lee already well past his per game average. Working on a spare here with his final ball of game number 1. He could be around 200 if he does well here in this role. Rossick looking for the extra ball. He'll get it. Nice spare there by the sophomore. Lim's final ball. And Lim will finish with a 210. Stephen Lim rolls a 210. He had a high game of 230 this season. That's one of his better performances. As Rossick with the extra ball for BC, and he makes the most of it as the sophomore off the spare in the 10th gets a strike, and Rossick will finish with a 139. So Paul and Rossick well below their per game averages for BC. Rignola just above it. There's a strike to get things going in the 10th frame for Edward Coe. Coe now with back-to-back strikes dating back to the 10th frame. Lee for Bergen Catholic will start off with a strike of his own. Third strike of this opening game for Bergen Catholic's Lee. As Coe now working on back-to-back strikes, going for the turkey himself. He'll leave 2 up in the back right corner. Over 200 for himself already as he'll try to spare it off and finish off his first game at a high note. Here's Lee's second ball. Lee will get a couple to fall at the end. As Coe trying to finish off with a spare and will do so. He'll convert. A spare there and have a 234. So Edward Coe well over his per game average as Lee will settle for that last shot being a 9. He'll finish with a 176. So Andy Lee with 176. Now the final balls here for Alvin Gian. And Gian starts off with a strike. 7 strikes in this opening game for Gian. Averages 190.5, and Fort Lee has been taking it to Bergen Catholic here in game number 1. They lead by 220, and they're still building up on that lead. Gian will have a chance to finish it off with a spare. He's upset he left that 1 pin up. Currently has a 214. .864 the score right now. The team score for Fort Lee. And the spare is converted there, so at 234 for Gian. .224 for Coe, 234 for Gian, 210 for Lim, and a 197 for Katayama. .865 team score for Fort Lee there in the opening game. Bergen Catholic put up a 626. Outstanding opening game for the Bridgemen. Lead 239 total pins after game number 1. Again, Brignola was the leading bowler for BC with the 183 in the opening game. Andy Lee followed with the 176. Nick Rossick with the 139, and Stephen Paul with the 128 for the Crusaders. So an amazing first game there. Second best game this season for Fort Lee. 865 by 1 pin, as head coach Neil Grant just informed me. So Fort Lee leading 865 to 626 overall pin total. And on top in the team scoreboard 2-0. After the first game, here's your watching coverage of Fort Lee boys bowling action, taking on Bergen Catholic here to close out their 2022-23 season. Richmond looking for their 16th win of the year. Bergen Catholic looking for win number 17. BC will bowl on Monday in the state championships in North Brunswick. This is the final action of the year for Fort Lee. BC having two of their star bowlers not participating here today. But I think even if they bowled, I don't know if they would have made that much of a difference the way that Fort Lee was on their game in game number 1. As Brignola will roll an 8 to start off game number 2 for the Crusaders on 49. There in their red. In their gray is Fort Lee as Katayama another strike. Keizo Katayama 197 in the first game. 12 pins better than his per game average. Brignola for Bergen Catholic was 7 pins better in his per game average in the opening game as he starts off with a spare here in the first frame. Stephen Lim just left 1 pin up. He'll settle for the 9. Stephen Lim had a great opening game. 30 pins better than his per game average. Lim was on fire. Just like the rest of his team, they were accurate as can be. I think maybe only once did they not convert even on a spare in a frame. Bergen Catholic going to another number 2 bowler, Calvin Villanueva, the junior. And Villanueva will start with a strike in his first ball here in game number 2. So Villanueva starts in game number 2 for Coach Larry Fierro. Spare strike for the Crusaders. Strike and a 9 right now for Fort Lee. They missed on the spare. Edward Coe leaving a couple up there. Coe at a 224 in game number 1. 30 pins better than his per game average. So when you have a couple of bowlers doing 30 pins better than what they normally do, that's going to lead to a big score for your team. And Rossick starts off with a strike for BC. Spare strike for the Crusaders here in the first frame of game number 2. Coe looking for the spare on lane 50 for the Bridgeman. And he just missed it. So those type of shots that Fort Lee were executing and knocking down with relative ease in the first game They've started off now, missing a couple of spare opportunities here. Here's the anchor for Bergen Catholic here today, and Andy Lee. He spun that one. Knew that he didn't feel like he got all of it. Gian for Fort Lee. He was the high scorer in the first game with a 234. Gion's high game this season was a 250 he rolled against DePaul Catholic, a team that's in Bergen Catholic's division. The BC swept twice in the regular season. He rolled a 250 against the Spartans back on January 17th. Here's Lee going for the spare for BC, and he gets it. So Bergen with 2 spares and 2 strikes here in the first game, the first frame of game number 2. Gian converts the spare for Fort Lee. So Fort Lee with a strike, spare, and a pair of 9s. Bergen Catholic will take the lead into the second frame of game number 2. Again, if Fort Lee wins in this second game, they will win the overall matchup as Katayama again starts off with back-to-back strikes here in game number 2. Brignola leaves the 10-pin up as he'll have a chance at a second consecutive spare for the junior, who again was the high scorer for the Crusaders in game number 1. Lim will leave the 7-pin up and roll a 9. Brignola not able to convert on that spare opportunity with the gutter ball on the right side. So he's got a 19 through the first 2. Lim just misfiring there that time to the left side. So back-to-back 9s. That'll bring up the second shot here for Calvin Villanueva, the junior. Again, did not start in game number 1 for the Crusaders. Got a strike in his first ball of game number 2. Villanueva now building off of that with a 9. Villanueva with a 168.3 pin average. Had a high game of 189 this season against Eastern Christian recently on the 15th of February. There's Coe, and Coe is left with a split that time. This will be a difficult opportunity to try to convert on the spare for Coe. Again, Fort Lee, if you're just joining us, a big first game. Defeated Bergen Catholic by over 200 pins, 865 to 626. Villanueva converts on the spare, so a start with strike spare for Villanueva. And Fort Lee nearly converted on a very difficult spare opportunity there by Coe, but he left one up on the lane. So after that tough split, settles for the 9 in that second frame. Rossick for BC. Softball there leaves 3 left standing. Now back over to lane 49 and Alvin Gian for Fort Lee. Gian just gets enough there at the very end to knock over the last pin, and he'll get a strike. So Gian, who was so money in the first game with a 234, he was the high bowler for both schools. He starts off game number 2 with a spare and a strike in the opening frames. Rossick left that one in the gutter. That'll bring up Andy Lee. They're just correcting as Rossick had a 7 in that last frame. Fort Lee now with a 4-pin lead right now as they go to Lee. Last bowler of this second frame. As Lee just leaving that 7-pin up on the left side. As Lee will look to convert on the spare. Had a spare back in the first frame as well. BC with a 14-pin lead right now for the first 2 frames. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and supporting these student athletes. It's been a fun opportunity to get to a second chance to cover some high school bowling. We covered our debut bowling event not that long ago, earlier in the month, as the Fort Lee girls took on Holy Angels. And Lee converts on the spare there, as Bergen Catholic will lead by 15 heading into the start of the 3rd frame. Brignola starts with a strike for the Crusaders. Brignola knew that one felt good, as Katayama has been a strike machine the opposite side of him. But Keizo's chances there for a turkey fall 1 pin shy. Had a strike in the 1st and 2nd frames and gets a 9 there. His second ball is always this real sharp-looking yellow and black ball. And he just missed it, though. Could not convert on that 10 pin. And he'll settle for the 9. Villanueva for Bergen Catholic on lane 49, but going first on lane 50 is Stephen Lim for Fort Lee. And he generates the strike there, his first strike of the 2nd game. Villanueva answers with a strike of his own. It's always fun to see some of these younger guys getting a chance here to participate at the varsity level and make the most of those opportunities as well. Here's Rossick, only a sophomore for BC. He gets a strike as well. So Bergen Catholic with a chance to potentially strike out in the 3rd frame. First 3 bowlers with all strikes. Edward Coe answers with a strike for Fort Lee. Fort Lee with 2 strikes. Bergen Catholic with 3. Andy Lee now setting up the anchor for BC. Crusaders trying to bounce back after a lackluster start of this matchup by their high standards. And Lee will continue that strike party for Bergen Catholic. All 4 Crusaders throw strikes in that frame. Fort Lee not that far behind them. They throw 3 in a row themselves after Gian converts on the strike. Bergen Catholic will take an 8-pin lead with them into the start of the 4th frame. Fort Lee won the opening game and have the high pin total. You'd have to think that that's going to be well in their margin, as Bergen Catholic's Brignola gets an 8 on his first ball of the 4th frame. So if you go by those standards and you think that maybe Fort Lee is going to assure themselves the total pin, right now it would be a 3-0 lead. The only way that Bergen Catholic could come back and win this overall matchup is if they win the 2nd game and then go on to win the 3rd game as well. Fort Lee has given themselves some breathing room with how they performed at such a high level. Again, according to head coach Neil Grant, their 2nd best 1-game total all season long, as Brignola then converts on the spare. Nice start there for the junior for BC. And Lim will finish it off with a spare himself after Katayama's strike opened up the 4th frame for Fort Lee. So Katayama has 3 strikes in his first 4 frames. Villanueva now on lane 50 for BC. And he's been a strong addition here to the Bergen Catholic lineup in the start of this 2nd game. Villanueva with 3 strikes and a spare. Back to 49 with Edward Coe. Coe with a strike. Back-to-back strikes now for Coe. Alvin Gian will step up next for Fort Lee, as Rossick bowls for BC and leaves 4 on the lanes. Gian in search of a turkey. He's working on 2 consecutive strikes. Had a spare in the first frame, strikes in 2 and 3. There's the turkey. 3 consecutive strikes now for Alvin Gian, who again had a 234 back in the first game. Rosick, difficult approach here with 4 pins split out, and he only settled there for 1. So he leaves 3 on the board. 14-pin lead now for Fort Lee after Bergen Catholic had the opportunities early on and took an initial lead in the second game. Again, if Fort Lee wins in the second game, they have assured themselves the overall win here this afternoon against Bergen Catholic. Lee for Bergen Catholic. Back-to-back strikes for the Crusaders. Opened up with a pair of spares and now a pair of strikes. And Bergen Catholic will take a 6-pin advantage into the start of the 5th frame here in game number 2. Katayama, another strike here for Fort Lee. He's been blazing as the leadoff bowler in this lineup. 4 strikes in 5 frames here in game number 2 for Katayama. Rignola, that time going right hard and heavy at the head pin, leaving just the last 2 up on the far left side. Lim will generate the strike again. Lim's second strike of game number 2. Rignola, did he get it over enough? No, he left 2 up there on the lane. Rignola now with a 74 through the first 5 frames of game number 2. Edward Coe now on lane 50. Coe just left the 7-pin up as he was trying to match the turkey feet of his teammate Alvin Gian. Villanueva now on 49. As Villanueva also 1 pin shy of a turkey as he was working on back-to-back strikes. Coe will try to look for the spare and knock down the 7. Now Villanueva will have to knock down the 10-pin. Coe did his job. Produces the spare. Villanueva does his job. He produces the spare of his own. Calvin Villanueva, good start there for the junior. Gian. That was a heavy ball right of the head pin. That leads to this split after he started off with a spare and 3 consecutive strikes. This will be a tough conversion opportunity for Gian. Rosick. Leaving 3 up here for BC. Nick Rosick, the sophomore. Alvin Gian, his final high school bowling match of his career, the senior, will settle for the 9 there in that 5th frame. He already is up to 106, continuing to be the star bowler here today for both sides. Rosick looking for the conversion. Goes to the white ball and just left that head pin up, so he'll settle for the 9. He's up to 57 through 5. Now here's Andy Lee for BC. Lee with back-to-back strikes in this second game. Spare, spare, strike, strike. Lee with a chance at the turkey. And Lee will be denied that chance of the gobbler as the 7-pin just refused to go down. Right now, the current advantage for Fort Lee is 12-pin margin. As Lee looks to convert here. And will do it. Had a little body language into it as well. Didn't initially think that he got all of it, but had the accuracy there to convert at the very end. So Andy Lee with 3 spares, 2 strikes in his first 5 frames of game number 2. Fort Lee has taken the lead. Now a 10-pin margin. Keizo Katayama. He looks for the turkey as well. He's building off 2 consecutive strikes. He has 4 strikes in the first 5 frames. Katayama will make it a turkey. 3 consecutive strikes for the senior Keizo Katayama. And this also his final high school match of his high school career. As Brignola will get a 9 there and have a chance at a spare opportunity. Here's Stephen Lim. Lim knew it right away as he threw it. Got the strike there for Fort Lee. Again, if the Bridgemen win here in game number 2, they will already clinch against Bergen Catholic. Brignola does convert the spare. Edward Coe. A strike there for Fort Lee. So Fort Lee now has a chance to strike out here in the 6th frame. As Katayama, Lim, and Coe each have thrown strikes. Villanueva answers with a strike of his own. Again, he's been the most consistent bowler here in game number 2. Here's Gian. And that time, not to his liking, as Gian will produce a 6. He was snake bit in the last frame as well as he had the split. Had to settle for the 9. Be a tough conversion as well for Gian. Was the high game out of any bowler so far in this matchup with the 234 in game number 1. Rossig with an 8. Gian gets the conversion as he kicked it over and knocked it down into the 10-pin. What a conversion there on the spare by Alvin Gian. I think he didn't even realize that he had that as he just turned around, made his way back to the table. And it's kind of cool to see both teams looking at our broadcast on their phones to see the reaction afterwards. Can't even chalk that up to being just so confident he didn't even have to turn around. He definitely thought he didn't get it, but it kicked out at the end. What a conversion there, and what a celebration for the Bridgemen. It's been that type of day for Fort Lee. So Alvin Gian converts on a very difficult spare. Strike, 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 spare in that 6th frame for Fort Lee. Now Andy Lee for Bergen Catholic. The anchor trying to finish things off here in the 6th frame for the Crusaders. And Lee will do it with a strike. Andy Lee's 3rd strike. Of game number 2. Fort Lee leads by 31 heading into the start of the 7th frame. Dan Long, Dimitri Nanis, glad that he could join us here on the Fort Lee Athletics YouTube channel. This boys bowling matchup, Fort Lee taking on Bergen Catholic. Brignola looking for the strike, but leaves the 7 up, so he'll settle for the 9. Katayama. gets the spare as he had a 9 initially. He converts on the spare after Katayama had 3 consecutive strikes. Brignolo with the spare. So the Bergen Catholic Jr. now makes it 2 consecutive spares in this matchup. Villanueva, again, did not get into the lineup for game number 1, has come in and has been a revelation for Larry Fierro here in game number 2 for Bergen Catholic. Has produced 4 strikes. As Lim, once again, will roll a strike and make that a turkey. 3 in a row for Stephen Lim, the junior, for Fort Lee. Villanueva will have another strike. Edward Coe now with his first ball of the 7th frame. Leaves 2 up. Rolls the 8. Rosick for Bergen Catholic will await his opportunity here on the 49th lane. Rosick will fire an 8. BC again will live to bowl another day as they will be participating in the state championships on Monday. As O will convert on the spare. Fort Lee starting to widen the gap here in the second game against the Crusaders. The lead currently is at 62. Rosick will roll that one into the gutter after trying to curve it a little bit. Also get a 74 right now through 7 frames. Gian, who had the improbable spare conversion in the last frame. Now we'll try to finish things off here with the final 2 pins as Andy Lee for Bergen Catholic trying to build off a strike in his last frame. Lee will strike again for BC. Gian will just leave 1 pin up this time. So if he got the benefit of last time, not able to do it this time around, he'll settle for the 9. As Katayama will start off the 8th with another strike. 6 strikes now in 8 frames for Keizo Katayama. Brignolo will start off for BC and will get 9 down as he's trying to make it another spare. Here's Lim. Lim has been the strike machine. 4 consecutive strikes here for Fort Lee. He's got 5 strikes through the first 8 frames of game number 2. Stephen Lim had a huge first game. He might be even bigger here for the start of game number 2. Fort Lee in control in game number 2 as well, trying to clinch this matchup in their final match of the season against Bergen Catholic and snap a 2-game losing streak. They've run into some very hot competition. Lost 7-0 to Hackensack on February 14th. Lost in their last match yesterday against Wallington 7-0. Taking on a Bergen Catholic team here today that had come in having won 10 matches in a row. BC is bowling without 2 of their top bowlers here today. They are in the JV round, JV competition. And have elected not to bowl here in the varsity competition today. Go trying to finish this one off. It'll be a tough opportunity. Trying to kick it over into the 7, but settles for the 9. Villanueva on lane 50 for BC. Holds a 9, leaves the 10 pin up. As Villanueva was once again trying to have a turkey. Alvin Gian goes for a 9. As Villanueva will have a chance at a spare. Five strikes and 2 spares for the first 7 frames for Calvin Villanueva, the junior for Bergen Catholic. Gian will look for the conversion here for Fort Lee. Gets the curve and gets the spare. Fort Lee leads by 90. Villanueva gets the spare. Calvin Villanueva for Bergen Catholic might be approaching his high game of the season. He rolled a 189 a couple of days ago. He's making the most of these varsity experiences. That's something that Larry Fierro was talking to me about before the start of today's match, that even though he's not having 2 of his thumpers in the lineup, this gives a chance for his younger bowlers to show what they got, get a little experience here, and maybe put that thought in the minds of the coaching staff heading into next season of they're going to be part of the starting lineup for this Bergen Catholic team. The Big North United Division champions this year when undefeated in league play. And then just recently claimed their first state sectional championship since 2010. Rossick is one of those young bowlers for BC. And the sophomore looking for the spare, but will leave 1 pin up. And Rossick, who averages just around 162 per game, right now at an 83 through 8 frames. Andy Lee looking for his own turkey. He has 2 consecutive strikes for Bergen Catholic, as he's the final bowler of the 8th frame. Wobbling but not falling down was that 7 pin. So Lee will have to settle for a spare opportunity. It's a 52-pin lead right at the moment here for Fort Lee as we're nearing the conclusion of this second game. Watching all the action here from Boulder City and Hackensack, New Jersey. Fort Lee in the gray polos taking on Bergen Catholic in their red with the Cape Crusader logo on the back. Lee will convert on the spare and knock down the 7. So Lee has a 157 through the first 8 frames. Lee and Villanueva have been the best 2 bowlers here in game number 2 for BC. The lead is 50 for Fort Lee as we head to the 9th frame. Rignola starts off with a bang here for BC with a strike as they try to mount the comeback. Katayama leaving that 10 pin up. Will settle for the 9. Katayama with 6 strikes in the first 8 frames. He has been outstanding at the top of this lineup here today for Coach Neil Grant. Katayama just got enough. Got the spare, knocked down the 10. Katayama up to 175 through 9 frames. Villanueva. A little heavy there in the head pin. He knew it as well. Didn't get that curve that he wanted. Went right down Broadway. Left 2 pins up. And Lim with another strike. Stephen Lim now with 5 consecutive strikes. Lim had a high game of 230 against Riverdale earlier this season, as Lim is going to be threatening to surpass that total. 5 consecutive strikes after he began with a couple of empty frames in the first 2 frames. He found his location and was able to get things going here. Now Villanueva trying to convert on the split. He'll settle for the 9. Lead is 63 pins right now for Fort Lee. As Coe will leave 2 up and have an opportunity here. Fort Lee again, if you're just joining us, won decisively by over 200 pins in the opening game. Going to try to take care of business here in game number 2. Rossick for BC. Will settle for the 6. Coe looking for the spare. And Coe will have to settle for the 9. As Coe with a 134 right now through 9. Rossig for BC will just manage to get that 1 pin. And will settle for the 7. As Fort Lee gets a strike there from Alvin Gian. He'll have the strike to finish off the 9th frame for the Bridgemen, who lead by 85 as we head to the final bowler in this frame for BC. It's Andy Lee. Lee with 4 strikes and 4 spares so far in this second game. Lee gets the strike for Bergen Catholic. Turns around with a big smile on his face. As we head to the 10th frame for game number 2. Fort Lee leading by 65 pins. So again, if Fort Lee holds on to win in this second game, they will win the overall matchup, assuring themselves against BC. Brignola has something to say about it. Throws a strike. Now Katayama will have that 1 pin just stay up and wobble. So he'll have a big smile on his face, knowing he was just inches away from starting off with a strike and now have a chance at a spare. John Brignola started off with a strike in his first ball here for Bergen Catholic in the 10th frame. Back-to-back strikes for Brignola. Chance of the turkey. And he gets it. 3 consecutive strikes now for the junior for BC. As Katayama on lane 49 will miss on his spare attempt. And Katayama will roll a 203. Even better than what he did in the first game. So a 203 for Katayama in game number 2. Again, above his per game average. Brignola trying to finish off on a high note. And it will just be an 8 there on his final ball. As Brignola will end with a big game there, as he had 3 consecutive strikes before that last ball being the 8. As Stephen Lim finally shows he's a mere mortal after he had produced 5 consecutive strikes for Fort Lee. Brignola finishes with 190 for the Crusaders in game number 2. So again, second consecutive time that the junior has bowled above his average for BC. Stephen Lim trying to get a spare and get another ball here in the 10th frame as Villanueva rolls a 9 on lane 50. Lim converts on the spare and will get that extra ball. Stephen Lim has been the difference in this matchup. He's been one of those bowlers that has been really going high above his average. Bowled to 210 in the first game. Average is a 180. Already above that with a 196 here. Working on his last ball. And Lim will end with a final roll of an 8 there. 214. So a 210 and a 214. Outstanding start to this day for Lim as Villanueva missed on that opportunity, the extra ball. As Villanueva will be put into the lineup and produces here in game number 2 for the Crusaders with a 194. For Villanueva, that is his high game this season for Bergen Catholic. Now Edward Coe will begin the 10th frame for Fort Lee. Coe rolls a 9. Edward Coe had a 224 back in the first game. So Fort Lee currently enjoys a 71-pin margin. Looks like they will be taking game number 2 as well, and in the process assure themselves a victory here against Bergen Catholic this afternoon. Go looking for the extra ball and will get it after he converts there on the spare. Nick Rossick for Bergen Catholic looking for a spare and the extra ball himself. And Rossick will just misfire there on the outside. Rossick will finish with a 98 for BC in game number 2. Now Coe's third and final ball of the 10th frame. As Coe will finish off with a bang and a strike there. As Coe will finish with a 163. Below his per game average, but assuring himself and his team the opportunity to win this overall matchup against BC, as Lee will try to finish things off for Bergen Catholic, as he's the anchor leg for the Crusaders. Lee with a 9 on his first offering of the 10th. Gian here, first ball here for Fort Lee, and he will also fire a 9. So both bowlers with a chance here to pick up the spare and get the extra ball. Lee will convert on the spare. So Lee will get an extra ball. Seems to be a pin still on the lane that they had to fix there. They'll count that as the spare for Gian, as he just knocked it down. It was already down, but once he hit it, then the machine registered it as a spare, so he was going to get it anyway. Pretty nifty bowling there, as Lee's final ball for Bergen Catholic, as he'll settle there for a 7 and a 214. And Gian will finish with a strike for Fort Lee, as he finishes with a 193. So Andy Lee and Stephen Lim each were the high bowlers for their respective sides with a 214 there in game number 2. Fort Lee won game number 2 as well, 773 to 696. So Fort Lee has assured themselves the overall victory here today against Bergen Catholic. But we will still have one final game to bowl here. Stick around as we'll be back for the start of game number 3 here between Bergen Catholic and Fort Lee, as you're watching all the action on the Fort Lee Athletics YouTube channel. So Fort Lee has assured themselves the victory, now trying to see if they could sweep away Bergen Catholic as we get underway for the start of game number 3. I'm Dan Long, joined alongside by Dimitri Nanis, as we are broadcasting our second bowling match of the season here on the Fort Lee Athletics YouTube channel. This is our second opportunity to be here in Boulder City. First time seeing the Bridgman boys in action here today, as they are taking on Bergen Catholic. Fort Lee is going to be picking up their 16th win of the season, snapping a 2-game skid of late after losing earlier in the week to Hackensack and Wallington. Bergen Catholic, 16-1 on the season, will go to 16-2, but they will live to bowl another day. The season comes to an end here today for the Bridgman. Bergen Catholic will participate in the state championships on Monday. Katayama started with an 8, and John Brignola for Bergen Catholic starts with a spare. Lim's first offering. Just made sure that he got enough and not into the gutter. Stephen Lim, a 210 in game one, a 214 in game two. He's been a big difference here for Neil Grant's side today. 30 pins and 34 pins, better than his per game average. Now Villanueva will roll the strike for Bergen Catholic on lane 50. Lim will have to settle for the 9 there in the first frame of game number 3. Lim went on a roll in that second game at 1.5 consecutive strikes. Stephen Paul back in the lineup here for BC. Paul rolled a 128 in the first game and then was on the JV lanes in game number 2. Coe for Fort Lee is the third bowler. Coe had a 224 in game number 1 and came back to earth a bit in game number 2 with a 163. His average is 194. And Paul will settle for the 9. Go looking for the spare. And just got it. Knocked down the 2 there as one was just right behind it. Good execution there for Edward Coe, one of the seniors in his final high school match here today. Lee for Bergen Catholic. Nearly had a split. Will contend with the 2. Jung will throw that one with power and also have 2 pins identical to Lee left standing. Jung, Coe, Katayama. 3 seniors in the lineup here today for Coach Neil Grant. Just missing on that conversion was Lee for Bergen Catholic. No seniors for BC in the lineup today for Coach Larry Fierro. So both of the anchors just have 9s put up on the board in the first frame. It'll be a 2-pin advantage for Bergen Catholic heading into the second frame. Katayama on lane 50 will roll the strike. Brignola for Bergen Catholic on lane 49 will have an 8. That's 2 pins left standing on the left side of the lane. Lim gets a strike for Fort Lee, so back-to-back strikes now for the Bridgemen to begin the second frame here in game number 3. Brignola does convert on the spare as he rolled that one slowly and still got him a drop on the left side of the lane. So Brignola with back-to-back spares for BC. He's been steady here today for the Crusaders. 183 in first game, 190 in game number 2, both above his per game average. As Coe misfired by his high standards. Now Villanueva. Right down the middle and left 1 pin standing. Has a chance at the spare. A younger BC lineup getting some experience here today against one of Bergen County's best teams in Fort Lee. Co-champions of the Big North American Division this season with Dumont. Each team went 7-1 in league play. There's the conversion on the spare by Coe. As Villanueva will convert on the spare himself for BC. So a strike and a spare for Villanueva to start off this third game. A 9 there for Alvin Gian. Gian has been above his average in both games, 234. That's still the biggest number so far here today for both teams. Then he rolled a 193 in game number 2. His average is 190.5. Stephen Paul with the strike for Bergen Catholic. The sophomore getting it to drop as Gian will convert on the spare. Fort Lee through their first 2 frames. Strike, strike, spare, spare here in the second frame for the Bridgemen. Lee with a strike there for Bergen Catholic. So the Crusaders go spare, spare, strike, strike. And BC will lead by 13 heading into the start of the third frame. As Brignola starting things off with the Crusaders with a 7. Katayama with a 7 of his own. We'll see Keizo Katayama in the baseball season this spring. We'll be broadcasting the home baseball and softball games for the Bridgemen. And it's always an honor to broadcast different sporting events for the Bridgemen. This has been a neat one personally for me as well. As a proud Bergen Catholic alum, getting the chance to broadcast a rare matchup featuring the Bridgemen and the Crusaders. As Brignola will settle for the 9 there after they correct that score. He's got 44 through the first 3 frames. Katayama with the spare. Fort Lee put up an 865 in game number 1, have not looked back since. Outscored the Crusaders by over 200. And there's a late strike by Villanueva as that 7-pin finally decided to fall. So Villanueva with 2 strikes and a spare. He has been very good for Bergen Catholic. And speaking of very good, it's been that type of day for Stephen Lim. Lim with back-to-back strikes now. Having one of his finer performances. His high set this season was a 694. Was a 599 against the ball. He might be threatening that. As Paul off of the strike for Bergen Catholic rolls a 7. Stephen Lim with a 210 in game 1, a 214 in game 2. So he might be having his best performance of the year in this final match of the season. As Edward Coe just left that 7-pin up. Paul looking for the spare conversion for BC. And he does get it. Kicks out that last pin at the very end. So Paul with a strike and a spare in his last 2 frames for BC. Again, we're inside Boulder City here in Hackensack, New Jersey. Thanks so much for joining us. As that time, Coe with a rare miss. Could not convert there in that spare opportunity. As Andy Lee will now set for Bergen Catholic as both anchors getting ready here in the third frame. Lee gets the strike for BC. Back-to-back strikes for the Bergen Catholic Junior. And Gian, the senior, with the strike. A thunderous strike at that for Fort Lee. As now we'll get going with the 4th frame. And Katayama, at times soft in the pocket, now leads to a big split. 2 pins on either side. Brignola rolling a 9 there, and the last pin just refused to fall. BC won their sectional championship over Bergen Tech by 27 pins. Liam Chin averages around a 204.5, and Justin Martin averaged 204.2. ranked in the top 10 in the county in per game average. As Brignola converts there, both of those bowlers representing the Bergen Catholic JV team this afternoon. Brignola has stepped in and done a nice job here as the leadoff bowler for Larry Fierro and the Crusaders. 3 spares there for the BC junior. As Villanueva getting set for BC as now Lim on the other lane for Fort Lee. Had a split of his own after he had rolled 2 consecutive strikes. He was on fire in the second game at one point. Villanueva with a strike. Back-to-back strikes for the BC junior. Now Lim trying to convert here on the spare. And Lim will settle for the 1. BC leading by 2 right now as Stephen Paul about to roll. Third place bowlers now going for both respective sides. As now it's going to be 3 pins left for Paul. Rolling on the other side as Coe will leave 1 pin remaining himself. Paul now with 3 pins left. Look for that advantage and just couldn't get the 10 pin to fall. So he'll settle for the 9 as Coe will look for the spare opportunity of his own. Again, this will only be the 2nd loss of the season for the Crusaders of Bergen Catholic. They lost previously back on January 9th against Hackensack 5-2. As Coe converts with the spare for Fort Lee. Richmond are going to be trying to get the full complement of team points here. They could win here today. They would win 7-0 and cap off the season 16-3 overall. Lee with another strike for BC. Give him the turkey. That's 3 in a row. Andy Lee had a 214 in the game 2. As Gian will keep 2 up. Lee with a 176 was the 2nd highest score for BC in game number 1. He's the high scorer in game number 2 for the Crusaders. As Katayama will start things off in the 5th frame for Fort Lee with a strike. Again, it's been a difference of the senior leadership for Fort Lee, making the most out of their last opportunity here in high school bowling. Having good performances. There's Jiang with another strong spare. Eight-pin lead for Bergen Catholic here in game number 3, trying to salvage a final result. As Lim will leave 2 up after the Katayama strike began things in this 5th frame for Fort Lee. As Brignola missing there off of the previous frame, which was a spare. Just going to be credited with the, well, it was actually an empty opportunity there. As Lim converts on the spare. Well, that was costly there, throwing the gutter ball on the first ball, building off a spare from the previous frame. So now Brignola's going to try to bounce back here and get an effort. On his 2nd ball here in the 5th frame, Brignola will have the 9. Strike spare, beginning of this 5th frame for Fort Lee. Edward Coe now getting set to fire it down the lanes. Coe will settle for the 7. 7-pin lead right now for Fort Lee. Villanueva. A strike for BC. Fort Lee leading by close to 300 total pins, so they're pretty much going to assure themselves, as I've mentioned, since that first game, the total pin advantage and that extra point that comes with it. And Ko knew that he missed it as he was making his way back to the table. And he'll settle for the 9 there in that 5th frame. As Stephen Paul now approaches this shot opportunity, and he produces the strike for Bergen Catholic. Gian with a strike of his own for Fort Lee. BC trying to make it 3 consecutive strikes to finish off this 5th frame. They lead currently by 11 pins here in the 3rd game. They lost by over 200 pins in game number 1. Lost by 77 pins in game number 2. As Lee will settle for the 8s. Reminder, fans, that you can join us for playoff action on Monday nights at 6 p.m. from East Gymnasium of the campus of Fort Lee High School, as the Fort Lee Bridgman girls basketball team will be hosting a first-round contest against North Hunterdon in the North Tooth Group 3 sectional playoffs. That's coming up on Monday night. You can watch it here on YouTube starting at 6 p.m. Your broadcast home for Bridgman Athletics. Andy Lee converts on the spare. Bergen Catholic will take a 39-pin lead into the start of the 6th frame here in our third and final game of the day from Boulder City. That was a soft approach by Brignola, and that leads to the split. Katayama answers with a strike. Keizo Katayama, big smile on his face. Back-to-back strikes now for the senior. He has rolled 3 strikes here in game number 3. Brignola looking like he was trying to go to the right side and won't be able to knock any of them down. He'll settle for the 7. Lim kicks out the front pin and we'll have 9 down. We'll have to attack down the 7 pin there to garner that spare. Villanueva for Bergen Catholic working on a turkey. He's 3 strikes. And he has actually produced 4 strikes in his first 5 frames. So Villanueva will get ready here to try to make it 4 strikes in a row. Make it 4 in a row for Villanueva. As Lim will miss on that spare opportunity. So Calvin Villanueva did not play in the first game of the day for Bergen Catholic. Produced a 194, which is his high score of the season in game number 2. And I think he's putting in his name for recognition for next year when he'll enter into his senior season and might be a natural in that starting lineup for Bergen Catholic. Again, Bergen's 2 top seniors participating in the JV match here today, not in the varsity contest. Stephen Paul and the youth movement for BC starting to get a little more consistent and stronger as we're in the third game. As Ko for Fort Lee was not happy with that ball. Stephen Paul with back-to-back strikes. Edward Ko now trying to salvage this opportunity here, as Andy Lee is also going to be going for BC in lane number 49. Lee with the strike, and Bergen Catholic 3 consecutive strikes as a team. As BC trying to win their first game of the day against the Bridgman. Ko with a difficult spare opportunity. Just nicks off 1 pin. He'll settle for the 7 there. Coe with the 79 through the first 6 frames. Katayama with the strike. He's been consistent at the top of the lineup for Fort Lee here today. Katayama with a 197 in game number 1, a 203 in game number 2. Finishing off the frame with a strike was Alvin Gian. As Gian now with back-to-back strikes in this contest, Bergen Catholic's lead is 21. Lim holds a 9 for Fort Lee. As now Brignola for BC with his first ball of the 7th frame. And Brignola gets the strike. A much-needed strike by his standards. And a couple of empty frames the last couple of opportunities that he's been on. Lim zeroes in on the conversion. Converts on the 10-pin and gets the spare. Here's Villanueva of Bergen Catholic. 4 consecutive strikes for the junior. He is at his best afternoon of the season as a varsity bowler. Averages a 168.3. At a 194 in his last game. Villanueva will just leave 1 pin up as he was looking for 5 consecutive strikes. Back to lane 49 for Fort Lee as Coe leaves 3 up on the right side. Edward Coe, the leading bowler of the season for Fort Lee, a 224 in game number 1 and a 163 in game number 2. Coe will look for his spare opportunity. Has 3 spares here in the 3rd game. Give him 4 spares. Good conversion there for the Bridgman senior. Villanueva sets and fires for BC. And he gets the spare. So Villanueva, an outstanding 2nd game. 5 strikes, 2 spares as Jung knocks down the strike quickly for Fort Lee. He now has a turkey, 3 consecutive strikes in the 5th, 6th, and 7th frames for the anchor for Fort Lee. Paul looking for a turkey of his own. Just drifted over to the left side. As that'll be an 8 now for Stephen Paul. Bowled in the first game, threw a 128 for Bergen Catholic, then was switched over to participate in the JV match in game number 2, and is back here in the varsity lineup for game number 3. Paul looking for the conversion and gets it. Produces the spare there, his 2nd spare of this 3rd game. As now Andy Lee for BC, the 4th bowler in the lineup for the Crusaders, will try to finish things off for both sides in the 7th frame. As we're closing in on the end of our afternoon here at Boulder City, we thank you for joining us for high school boys bowling coverage here on the Fort Lee Athletics YouTube channel. Lee, so tantalizingly close for a strike. And that 1 pin just wobbled and refused to go down. Lee was right at his average in the first game at 176, well above it, but the 214. He and Stephen Lim of Fort Lee each had 214s in that 2nd game. Highest score today was the 234 by Alvin Gian back in game number 1 for Fort Lee. Lee will convert there on the spare for Bergen Catholic. As BC will take a 58-pin lead into the start of the 8th frame as Brignola will bowl on lane 49. Puts up the 7. Katayama. Another strong strike for Katayama. Make that 4 strikes in a row for the leadoff bowler for the Bridgemen. Keizo Katayama, the senior in his final high school bowling match of his career. Going out on a high note. Brignola just left that front pin and will settle for the 9 to start off the 8th frame. Now Lim will answer with another strike for Fort Lee. Back-to-back strikes now for the Bridgemen, trying to track down the Crusaders late here in the 3rd and final game. Fort Lee has already assured themselves of the overall team win here today. The question will it be by a 5-2 margin, or will it be a straight sweep of the Crusaders and win 7-0? Edward Coe could not make it 3 strikes in a row for Fort Lee. Here's Villanueva for BC. He's been their top bowler in this game. Villanueva produces another strike. 6 strikes in 8 frames for Calvin Villanueva of Bergen Catholic, working on his best performance of the season. And a good spare conversion there by Coe. So strike, spare here for Fort Lee in the 8th frame. A 9 and a strike for BC as they go to their 3rd bowler in Stephen Paul. BC lead currently at 29 pins. Paul just leaving that 10 pin up. Always like seeing his bowling ball, the first one he throws that looks like earth. That time, a roll just off the mark by Gian. Gian was working on 3 consecutive strikes before that ball when he produced the 7. Paul looking to convert here. Brings out the white ball for his 2nd ball. And will convert there. He knew it. He was confident walking away that time. As Jiang converts also with a spare. Andy Lee will finish things off for both sides here in the 8th frame. Trying to increase this BC lead heading into the final couple of frames. Lee will leave the 10 pin up. Looking for back-to-back spares here. As he had a spare in the 7th frame. Now looking for the spare here in the 8th. BC's lead is currently at 39. And they get it. There's the spare for Andy Lee. As we head now to the 9th frame, Bergen Catholic on top by 40 pins, 565 to 525. As Brignola close to a strike, will settle for the 9 and once again have to knock down the 10 pin. Katayama, can he make it 5 strikes in a row? No, he left it there that time with the split. Katayama had 4 strikes in a row dating back to the 5th frame. Brignola looking for the spare. Junior just missed it. He'll settle for the 9. Katayama will miss everything that time and will leave 3 on the lanes. Katayama upset with himself there. Now Villanueva will go on lane 50 for BC. For a strike in his last frame in the 8th. And he'll be left with a split as well. Tough conversion for the Crusaders. And then a gutter ball thrown on the first ball there by Stephen Lim. So I think both teams starting to tire out a little bit here as we're nearing the finish line of this contest between Fort Lee in the gray and Bergen Catholic in the red. Villanueva with the split. Which direction does he go? And for Stephen Lim, a rare miscue. Threw a gutter ball in his first offering here of the ninth frame, off of a strike in the last frame. That time Villanueva didn't get anything. Left 3 on the lane. And Lim will be able to produce 8 there after the gutter ball at first. He is down to 25 for Bergen Catholic. Not assured that the Crusaders will win this third and final game. Paul for BC. He'll roll an 8. Edward Coe trying to get going here for Fort Lee. Coe will manage to produce a 9. This will be a tough opportunity here for Paul with the split on lane number 50 for BC. Paul tried to kick it over into the 10, but will settle for 1 pin knocked down and a 9. Coe will line up the spare. Third consecutive frame that he's produced a spare. Lead is 24 for Bergen Catholic. As we go now to both anchor bowlers here, the fourth bowlers in their respective lineups. Alvin John and Andy Lee. Here's BC's Lee. Gets the strike there to end the ninth frame for Bergen Catholic. Jong, will he answer with a strike of his own? He will! Strikes abound for both fourth place bowlers in their lineups as we head to the 10th and final frame of game number 3. Bergen Catholic with a 24-pin lead. Again, trying to salvage the third and final game of the day after Fort Lee won by over 200 pins in game number 1 and by over 70 pins in game number 2. Brignola for BC will produce an 8. Katayama will get the strike to start things off for Fort Lee. Again, big smile on Katayama's face. His final tosses of his high school career. Brignola looking for the conversion on the spare to get an extra ball here in the 10th and final frame. And he does just that. He'll get an extra ball for BC. Katayama has caught fire here late. A roll of 7 there and have one extra ball here to try to finish off his high school career. Keizo Katayama, a 197 in game number 1, a 203 in game number 2. Brignola finishes off strong himself. As with that extra ball, he'll have that. Katayama just couldn't kick it over in time to the right side. As Katayama will finish with a 182. Brignola was below his average there with a 126 in the third and final game. There's a strike for Lim to start things off in the 10th frame for Fort Lee. Now the lead is down to only 15 for the Crusaders. Villanueva trying to keep pace. That time didn't drift enough to get that front pin. Lim has had a sensational afternoon. Trying to wield Bridgman back here and trying to sweep away BC. Lim again, second consecutive strike, has a chance to strike out here to finish off his afternoon and his season for the junior. Big opportunity here for Villanueva to get that extra ball for BC. Villanueva does that. Clutch conversion there will get him the extra ball. Now Lim trying to strike out here and pull the Bridgman even closer. Make this one interesting. And Lim will settle where it looks like the 9 there at the end, a 168 on the board for Stephen Lim. So a little below his usual per game average. Villanueva a chance here to get to 200. That would be his high game of the season. Villanueva will finish with the 8 there on that last ball and finish with a 211. So Calvin Villanueva, a 194 in game 2, a 211 in game number 3. His 2 best games and highest set of the season, as he had a high game of 189 previous to that. Edward Coe trying to take charge here as Stephen Paul is also awaiting his turn to go for BC. Coe with 1 pin left. As Paul will just wait. I think he'll allow Coe to go. Coe looking for the extra ball. He'll convert on the spare, and he'll get that extra ball. To start the 10th frame for Fort Lee. So Coe with 1 final shot in his high school bowling career, as Stephen Paul will go on 49 for BC. And he starts off with a strike. So Paul, the sophomore for the Crusaders, good start to the 10th frame. Coe trying to finish strong himself here for Fort Lee. And Coe will finish with a 9 there just before he was trying to get that strike. So Coe will finish with a 152 in game number 3. This is the second offering for Paul of BC after the strike on his first ball. A second consecutive strike now for Paul. Trying to give BC a little more breathing room. As the Bridgman trying to track them down here in game number 3. Alvin Jiang will fire that one, and a miss by his standards. Produces a 6 there. As Paul trying to produce the turkey here in the 10th frame and bring this to Andy Lee as the anchor for BC. Paul does just that. He strikes out there in the 10th frame, a turkey. And he finishes with a nice bounce back 179. Alvin Jiang finishes off with a spare there, so he'll get a 3rd and final ball. Maybe an opportunity to add to his big day. A 234 in game 1, a 193 in game 2. As now Andy Lee will set in fire for BC in his first offering of the 10th frame. Lee will destroy the pins there and produce a strike for the Crusaders. As Alvin Jiang will try to finish off his high school career here with a big number. 4 spares produced here today for Jiang. And he will also add 9 to that total, so he'll finish with a 205. He bowled above his average in every game here today. So Bergen Catholic is assured of winning this 3rd and final game as they lead by 7 currently. As Lee will have 2 more balls. As he will produce a number 8 and have a chance at a spare of his own. BC on top, 728 to 705. 23 pin margin. Again, Lee trying to finish it off with a spare. 176 in game 1, 214 in game 2. And Lee approaching potentially 200 here in game number 3. Good day at the office for the junior for BC. Lee will convert on the final ball of the day and finish with a spare. And once again, a 214. So Andy Lee, a 176 in game 1, a 214 in game 2, and a 214 in game number 3. So Bergen Catholic is victorious, 730 to 705 there in game number 3. But Fort Lee victorious here today as they win 5-2 overall. The overall pin total, 2,343 for Fort Lee. And for Bergen Catholic, 2,052. So nearly a 300 pin difference. Bergen Catholic, again, will lose for the first time since January 9th. They'll go to 16-2 on the season, but they will live to bowl another day in the state championships on Monday in North Brunswick at Bolero. For Fort Lee, they will finish off their season 16-3 overall, snap a 2-game losing streak at the end of their season with a victory here against the Crusaders. It was a fun one that we got to enjoy here. Bring you all the sights and sounds on YouTube, as a rarity to see Bergen Catholic lock horns with Fort Lee. We wish the Crusaders all the best as they contend for a potential state championship on Monday after winning the sectional championship. And once again, we cannot thank Neil Grant enough for allowing us to come and cover his boys bowling team, as we got the opportunity to cover the girls in their matchup against Holy Angels a couple of weeks ago here on our broadcast. This is revolutionary. Not a lot of places actually stream and broadcast high school bowling, but we were able to do that here today. So again, the final score, Fort Lee victorious over Bergen Catholic by a margin of 5-2. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to our broadcast coverage of this cross-divisional matchup in the Big North between BC and Fort Lee. For my producer, Dimitri Nanis, I'm Dan Long saying so long, and thanks for joining us here from Boulder City in Hackensack, New Jersey, and thanks for watching Fort Lee boys bowling coverage here on YouTube. Take care, everybody.